Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just used 3 words that could reopen one of the Democratic Party's most uncomfortable political debates. Woke one was crazy. The comment came as AOC was asked about controversial statements from Wisconsin gubernatorial candidate Francesca Hong, including her past calls involving the abolition of police and prisons and her remarks about Thanksgiving. But what makes this moment bigger than a joke is what AOC said immediately afterward, and what she didn't say. Because the Congresswoman was not simply defending a fellow progressive. She was drawing a line between the politics of 2020 and the politics Democrats are trying to run on today. During an interview on ABC's This Week, host Jonathan Karl pressed AOC on whether the socialist movement had gone too far. Karl pointed directly to her own previous support for defunding the police. Ocasio-Cortez responded that many of those debates happened during the height of the COVID shutdowns, when people were much more willing to consider major changes to public policy. She argued that the conversations of that period were productive, but acknowledged that the rhetoric used during lockdown is not necessarily rhetoric Democrats would use today. Then came the line that instantly grabbed attention. Laughing, AOC referenced a local city councilman's phrase, saying, "Woke one was crazy." Her larger argument was that voters should judge candidates based on what they are saying and campaigning on now, rather than simply recycling statements from years ago. And that distinction matters because Francesca Hong's political record has become a major issue in the Wisconsin governor's race. Hong is a Democratic socialist and a Wisconsin state representative who has been a leading contender for the Democratic nomination. Earlier statements from her included support for defunding police as a step toward abolishing them, and CNN reporting documented additional abolitionist positions. More recently, however, Hong's campaign has emphasized policies focused on criminal justice reform, including changes to incarceration conditions and support for public defenders. That creates a complicated political question. Should voters judge a candidate by what they said years ago, what they believe today, or some combination of both? And here's where the AOC story gets even more interesting. Karl pointed out that the National Democratic Socialists of America still maintains an abolitionist orientation in its political program. The DSA's own abolition working group currently says the organization is committed to reducing and ultimately abolishing what it describes as the carceral forces of the state, including prisons and police, while calling for police budgets to be reduced towards zero. So while AOC says she is a member of the New York City chapter rather than the national organization and doesn't agree with every national position, the broader ideological debate is very real. In fact, the relationship between AOC and the DSA has become increasingly complicated. The organization has been debating how it should approach a possible 2028 presidential endorsement, and AOC has been discussed as a potential candidate, even as parts of the national organization question whether she fully represents its political direction. Meanwhile, the New York City chapter remains closely connected to her political movement. That tension helps explain why this seemingly casual, woke one, comment is getting so much attention. AOC isn't saying every progressive idea from that period was wrong. In fact, she explicitly defended the value of those conversations. What she is saying is that the political environment has changed, the language has changed, and candidates should be judged on what they are actually proposing now. That is a very different political calculation from the atmosphere surrounding the 2020 racial justice protests and the national debate over policing. And Democrats have a reason to care about that shift. The fight over policing isn't happening in a political vacuum. For years, Republicans have used "defund the police" as one of their most effective attacks against progressive Democrats, arguing that the phrase represents a threat to public safety. Now, politicians on the left face a strategic choice: continue defending the language and policies associated with that era, or acknowledge that some messages that energized activists may have been much harder to sell to the broader electorate. That's why Francesca Hong's campaign has become such an interesting test case. Her earlier statements have not simply disappeared, but her current campaign is presenting a different policy agenda, while critics continue to question whether those older views have really been abandoned. AOC's answer is essentially that voters should look at the candidate standing in front of them today. But critics will inevitably ask a harder question: how much should a politician be allowed to change the message without fully explaining the change? And that may be the real political story here. Woke one sounds like a throwaway joke, but coming from one of America's most recognizable progressive politicians, it reflects a much larger recalibration happening on the Democratic left. The party's progressive wing still wants major changes to policing, criminal justice, economic policy and government. But the language used to sell those changes is evolving, especially as democratic socialists gain more influence and move closer to mainstream electoral power. For AOC, the challenge may be even bigger. She has become one of the most recognizable faces of the American progressive movement, while speculation about a possible 2028 presidential campaign continues to circulate around her. That means every attempt to separate today's politics from the politics of 2020 will be watched closely. If she wants to move beyond the most controversial parts of her political past, she may have to convince voters not only that the language has changed, but that her actual governing philosophy has evolved with it. For now, AOC's message is straightforward: judge candidates on what they're saying now. But the debate over what happened during Woke 1 clearly isn't finished. And as progressive candidates continue winning elections and Democrats prepare for the next national political battles, the question may become impossible to avoid: was that era simply a political mistake, or was it the beginning of a movement that is still changing American politics today? If you found this update helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to UNIX Media, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest news. Thanks for watching.